بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. اللهم نور قلوبنا بالقرآن وزين أخلاقنا بالقرآن. اللهم اجعلنا من أهل القرآن الذين هم أهلك وخاصتك. So we had commenced the story of Ashab Al-Kahf, the people of the cave, and today inshallah we'll try and complete that segment of the story. The youngsters had gone into the cave, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described the unique aspect of their sleep. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ بَعَثْنَاهُمْ لِيَتَسَاءَلُوا بَيْنَهُمْ. And similarly, we raised them up so that they could ask one another. قَالَ قَائِلٌ مِّنْهُمْ كَمْ لَبِثْتُمْ. One of them said, how long have you remained? So there was a response, قَالُوا لَبِثْنَا يَوْمًا أَوْ بَعْضَ يَوْمٍ. They said that we remained for a day or a part of a day. Because when they had gone into the cave, it was the morning, and when they had woken up, it was closer to the evening. So they assumed that it was a portion of a day. Then they said, قَالُوا رَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا لَبِثْتُمْ. That your Lord knows exactly how long you have remained in here. Because now they picked up that, you know what, actually something is not right. Although we went in the morning and it looks like it's the evening, it actually appears that we may have been in here for a longer period of time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows exactly how long we have been in here. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts this verse and He says, وَكَذَلِكَ, and similarly, He is referring to two amazing miracles in this particular incident. The first was the unique aspect of allowing them to go into this deep sleep, which was unnatural. They went into such a long sleep and they survived despite not having any nutrition, despite not having exercise, despite being exposed to the elements, which of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected them from in a certain way. But this was the first miracle. And then secondly, the second miracle, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alluding to here by saying, similarly, we raised you up, meaning this waking up in a fit and healthy manner after such a lengthy sleep is also a miracle. Because again, there was no nutrition, there was no exercise. Today, if a person doesn't walk or is in bed for more than 24 hours or 48 hours, it becomes challenging for them. The first time when they wake up, it's not easy for them to walk. And if they happen to be in bed for an extended period of time, sometimes a month, 2 months, 3 months, then they have to actually relearn how to use those muscles. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it such, and this is the unique miracle. And we'll discuss a little bit later on. One of the reasons for this is it is a sign of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise us all up on the day of Qiyamah. That this was always an objection from the kuffar of Makkah, that إِذَا مِتْنَا وَكُنَّا تُرَابًا وَعِظَامًا أَإِنَّا لَمَبْعُوثُونَ. After we become bones and we have decomposed and we have decayed, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to raise us up again? Meaning we like almost non-existent. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is indicating towards this particular aspect of this miracle. Then they said, فَبْعَثُوا أَحَدَكُمْ بِوَرِقِكُمْ هَذِهِ إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ. That send one of you with this silver coin of yours to the city, فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَيُّهَا أَزْكَى طَعَامًا, and let him look around at which of the eatables, which of the consumables, eating items are the purest. فَلْيَأْتِكُمْ بِرِزْقٍ مِّنْهُ وَلْيَتَلَطَّفْ وَلَا يُشْعِرَنَّ بِكُمْ أَحَدًا. So let him bring this provision. Let him bring this provision from there. And in addition, when he goes there, let him be very polite. He must be wary when he's interacting with the people, so that nobody comes to know about you. Because they were still afraid. Remember, they had left the city because of the king. Daqiyanus, and they now took refuge here. They don't know how long it is, whether the king is still there. So they said, look, be very polite, because nobody should perceive that you are the ones that went into the cave. Quietly go and bring some food and bring it back to us. So from here we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that firstly they took some provisions with them, they took some money with them. And from here we learn that having money is not against tawakkul. Having some provisions is not against zuhad, abstention, staying away from the world, and also tawakkul. These two important things, sometimes we don't understand it correctly, where a person feels like, in order for me to have this quality of zuhad, zuhad is known as abstention. I must not have anything to do with the dunya. What this means is that the dunya must not be in my heart. I must not be influenced in my actions because of my love for the dunya. But the fact that I recognize I require dunya to survive in this world, and therefore I take some provisions with me in a journey or wherever it is that I'm going, this is not against zuhad. It is also not against trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the hadith says that you adopt the means, tie your camel, and then you will adopt taqwa upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So part of taqwa, part of tawakkul, trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that you do make use of the means, because this dunya is a part of means. And then they said, look for that food which is the purest, because it's mentioned that when they were in the city, those people used to slaughter animals in the name of the idols, and therefore that food was haram. And so they knew that, you know what, the food may not necessarily be halal. So when you go out and when you search for that food which is halal. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that why should they be polite and why should they be very surreptitious, be very, cautious. Innahum iyadharu alaykum, that if they know about you, meaning the people of the city, yarjumukum, they might pelt you, or yu'idukum fi millatihim, or they may force you to revert to their faith, which is what they were trying to do originally. وَلَن تُفْلِحُوا إِذًا أَبَدًا, and of course if you do that, you will never find any success. So this is why they were told to be cautious. Now the ulama have taken out some important fiqhi masail from this incident, where they appointed one person to take their money and to go and procure some goods for them. Number one, partnership in a capital, musharaka, shirkat in capital is permissible. That means if all of us here today decide that we want to pool our funds and we want to enter into some sort of venture or partnership, either to procure or to invest, it's permissible for us to do that. Number two, it's permissible to give the power of attorney or the authority or agency to one person to transact on your behalf. Here is my funds, I'm giving it to Mr. A, please go and transact on my behalf. This aspect of wakala, of agency, it is also extracted from here. And the third thing is that if a group of people decides to come together and share their food, as we say here, a bring and buy, for example, now outwardly it would be impermissible because there is a bit of uncertainty as to how much each person is going to eat. I may only bring 2 items of food, but I might have a nice big appetite and I might be eating 5 or 6 items of food. So it's not exactly sure. Outwardly, from a Shari perspective, that would be impermissible because there's uncertainty. But when it comes to this aspect of coming together with food, and we learn it from here and from other ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is permissible for us to come together, bring the food together, and then eat, even though you might have one person who brings a lot of food and he eats very little, and another person who brings very little food, but he eats the lion's share of the food. This would still be permissible. وَكَذَلِكَ أَعْثَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and in this way, we made them known to the people. So this incident, and we'll discuss it now, they became known to the people, لِيَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ, so that they may come to know and understand that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true. This promise of resurrection, of making us alive once we die. وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا, and that the time, the day of Qiyamah, the hour, there is no doubt with respect to it. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making the people of the city aware. Now why is this the case? It is said that after this evil king, he died, many centuries passed on, and we'll discuss the number of centuries later on. What happened thereafter is that a new king came in, and this new ruler was actually a pure worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he changed the condition of the people. But some of the people had raised an objection, and they did not want to believe in the concept of being resurrected after death. So he tried many things to explain to them, and it is mentioned that after that he lost hope. So he, in logically explaining to them, so he put on the clothes of a poor person, and he sat down and made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh Allah, you help me in this matter to assist and bring the people to the correct understanding. Now after he did that, and the people of the Kahf had woken up, and they sent one individual, this person, he went, and it said that his name was Tamliha. He went and he went into one of the stores to purchase some food. And when he went to purchase the food, now he's paying with this old silver coin. So it's like, in South Africa, if you pay with a very old 5 Rand note, somebody pulls out a 5 Rand note or a 1 Rand note today, he won't know about the 5 Rand note and the 1 Rand note. The shopkeeper is going to be, bewildered. What is this? Is this even legal tender? So the shopkeeper asked him that, what is this here? So he said, no, this is the money that I have, right? And now he starts looking at it, and he asks him that, where did this coin come from, and where does it, belong to? And he thought to himself that perhaps he showed it to the other shopkeepers, and they thought, maybe this man, he found some treasure buried somewhere, and he's trying to use this money. But the man said to them, this is actually my own money. So they detained this individual, and they brought him before the king to say, there's something suspicious going on here. What do we do? So the king was a very pious and righteous man of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he knew that there was an old state treasure house, and in its archaeological archives, he had seen a tablet, and on that tablet was inscribed a list of the names of Ashabul Kahf, the people of the cave, with a description of the incident of their escape. One opinion is that that evil king, Daqyanus, he was the one who ordered this tablet to be inscribed so that he could declare these individuals as offenders. Their names could be preserved, their addresses could be preserved, and so if they were seen, they would be arrested and charged on sight. And other people say that there are reports that mention that people in the royal court who disapproved of the idol worship at that time, they took the people of Ashabul Kahf as people of truth. And in order to preserve their identity and not do it openly, they put together a tablet and they wrote the names of these people on the tablet. And it is mentioned that this tablet was known as Ar-Raqim. The name of the tablet was Ar-Raqim. So you will recall at the beginning of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Am hasibta anna ashab al-kahfi war-raqim. Do you think that the story of the people of the cave and Ar-Raqim, and we discussed whether these are two different people or the same people. So one opinion is that this tablet was known as Ar-Raqim, and therefore these people were also known as the people of Ar-Raqim. So the king knew about this event, and therefore when he inquired about the background of this individual, then he was convinced that this was one of the people of Ashabul Kahf. So he mentioned to him that I used to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that somehow he would make me fortunate enough to meet those people that had run away from the tyrant king for the sake of the preservation of their iman. And it seems as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has heard his prayer. So he decided, he asked the man to take him to the cave, and the man took him to the cave with a retinue of his people. And as they came close to the cave, this person said to the king that, look, allow me to go in myself and explain the situation to the people, my companions, because if they see you coming in here as the king, they're going to assume you're the old king, and they're going to believe that you are looking to kill them. So he went into the cave, he narrated the story to his companions. They were pleased, they met the king, they greeted the king, they showed respect to him, and then they returned to the cave. And when they returned to the cave, it is mentioned that they passed away. It is mentioned that they passed away. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows exactly. These details have not been mentioned specifically in this story. But this was now a story that became widespread in the city, and it became a lesson for the people to convince them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the power to resurrect people. Here he put these people, allowed them to sleep for this extended period of time, and he brought them back to life, and they were in perfect form. They could communicate, everything was perfect about them. In the same way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise each and every one of us on the day of Qiyamah. It's not far-fetched for us to think that after we have decayed, we will be raised up and be able to communicate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, لِيَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ, so that they realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise is true, وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا, and that there is no doubt about the hour, that is the day of Qiyamah. Now, with regards to the people of the cave, after they had passed away, a dispute or a discussion arose amongst the people. إِذْ يَتَنَازَعُونَ بَيْنَهُمْ أَمْرَهُمْ فَقَالُوا ابْنُوا عَلَيْهِمْ بُنْيَانًا, that when they were disputing amongst themselves in the matter, meaning what should we now do with these, this site? This is a holy site. What must we do? So they said, build a masjid or build a building over them. رَبُّهُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِهِمْ, their Lord knows them best. So some people said, look, we should build a shrine, we should build a museum, we should build a structure. قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا. Those who were dominant in the matter, and it is mentioned that it's the king and his advisors, those who were dominant in the matter, they said that we will certainly make a masjid over them. That is a masjid in that particular place. So they built a masjid, and this was now the masjid that commemorated the people of the cave. And from this, we also learn an aspect of fiqh, that making a masjid for salah near the graves of the pious friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is permissible. It's not a sin. It is permissible. There is a hadith in which the words of curse have appeared against those who make the graves of the Anbiya a masjid. Those who make the graves of the Anbiya a masjid, they are cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this means that when you make the graves a place of sajda or prostration, having a masjid where there is a pious person, and you will see throughout Islamic history and throughout the world, wherever you find pious people that are buried and their location is preserved, whether you go to Turkey, whether you go to Egypt, whether you go to other Muslim lands, you will find that all of the great ulama and the tabi'een and tabu tabi'een, many of them, they have been preserved, and near them or in and around that area, masajid have been built. But the people are not going there to make sajda to the graves, to the qabr of those people. Of course, if you are making sajda, that will be incorrect. But if there is a masjid that is there, it is totally permissible. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the number of people that was there. سَيَقُولُونَ ثَلَاثَةٌ رَابِعُهُمْ كَلْبُهُمْ. Some will say that they were 3 in number, and the 4th of them was the dog. وَيَقُولُونَ خَمْسَةٌ سَادِسُهُمْ كَلْبُهُمْ رَجْمًا بِالْغَيْبِ. Whilst others will say that they were 5 in number, and the 6th of them was the dog, but they are just making conjectures. They are just estimating. They're shooting in the dark, so to speak. وَيَقُولُونَ السَّبْعَةُ وَثَامِنُهُمْ كَلْبُهُمْ. And there are others that will say that there were 7, and the 8th one of them was the dog. So some ulama have gleaned from this that the first opinion was that there were 3. Then the next opinion was that there were 5. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refuted the 3, and he brought in the conjecture of 5. But that was also refuted, and it is said that there were 7. And after the number 7, there's no further elucidation of a different number. Therefore, some ulama say that there were 7 sleepers of the cave, and the eighth was the dog. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself clarifies, قُلْ رَبِّي أَعْلَمُ بِعِدَّتِهِمْ مَا يَعْلَمُهُمْ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. Say, my Lord knows best about their number. No one knows them except a few. The reality of how many people were there makes no real difference to the lessons that we glean from this story. And then very importantly, فَلَا تُمَارِ فِيهِمْ إِلَّا مِرَاءً ظَاهِرًا. Do not argue about them except an apparent or a clear argumentation. وَلَا تَسْتَفْتِ فِيهِمْ مِنْهُمْ أَحَدًا. And do not ask anyone of these about them. That means don't go and find out from the historians about how many people were there, etc. This is something that is irrelevant. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings in an important aspect of our deen, particularly for the people of knowledge, that there will be times when there will be differences that will arise on certain issues. When that difference or debate arises, then the people of knowledge, it is their duty to state that which is necessary, to clarify the situation and state that which is necessary. After that, if the people decide to continue to debate unnecessarily, then the people of knowledge should not waste time arguing and responding to those arguments, because it's not going to provide any benefit. Therefore, to try and dig deeper, to establish one's claim, or to make an extra effort to refute those debaters should be avoided, because nothing good is really going to come out of it. And by prolonging the debate, you might, firstly, you will be wasting time, and also you're going to create unnecessary bickering. This is a very important bit of advice for us today, particularly when it comes to social media. It's so often that a certain topic is put forward for discussion on a group. Sometimes it's a forward, sometimes somebody has an opinion about an event that has occurred or about some aspect of deen, etc. And firstly, we spoke previously when we spoke about Surah Al-Hujurat that we should be verifying the information before we actually post it. But we know the reality of it is many of the posts go unverified and people will continue to post that information. Now, to continue to debate back and forth, as you will see on our WhatsApp groups, sometimes hours will go by. You know, from Isha time all the way to midnight, people are, Googling this and putting their view, and, is it a hoax? Is it not a hoax? So much of time is wasted, whereas in reality, we could have put that time to productive use, even if we had gone to sleep at least, and that sleep would have been in ibadah, but rather we're spending our time online particularly. And WhatsApp is one forum. Those that are younger that use other platforms like Twitter and all these other, forums where there's a back and forth and a refuting, and, different groups are trying to fight with one another. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, let's not waste time on the unnecessary aspects. Let's not waste time on the unnecessary aspects, number one. And number two, don't ask questions that are irrelevant. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in another verse of the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tas'alu an ashya'a in tubda lakum tasu'kum. That, oh, you who believe, don't ask about those things which, if that information is brought to you, it's going to make it very difficult for you. And of course, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if you ask these things, then maybe some wahi is going to come down and it's going to make it very difficult for you. So again, we should not unnecessarily, sometimes we have this habit unnecessarily, is this halal, is that halal, look at that chain and this chain and where is it coming from and how is it coming, and of course it's important for us to consume halal, but if you overdo it in some of these matters, then life is going to become very difficult for you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guiding us to say that we should make sure that we do not unnecessarily spend our time trying to find certain things and, irrelevant information, particularly like in this situation, how many people were there in the cave? It doesn't really make a difference, right? So if we have to go and spend an enormous amount of time discussing the whole aspect of the number of people in the cave, and we lose the message of the cave, of the sleepers of the cave, then we've lost and wasted our time. وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. And don't say about anything that I'm going to do this tomorrow, except that you say, Insha'Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it. And this was one of the reason for the revelation of this. If you'll recall, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked by the people of Makkah with respect to the three questions that are discussed here. And he said that I will tell you about this tomorrow. And he forgot to say, Insha'Allah. And a period of 15 days went by when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala withheld wahi as a means to educate us as an ummah. And now they began to mock Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then this verse was revealed to say that when you say you're going to do something tomorrow, then you should say insha'Allah. Of course, this is mustahab. It is preferable. If a person does not say insha'Allah, firstly, he will not be sinful. And secondly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ, that if you forget, then when you remember your Lord, then at that time you will say insha'Allah, or وَقُلْ عَسَىٰ أَن يَهْدِيَنِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا, and say, perhaps my Lord will guide me towards that which is closest to guidance. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes this discussion wherein He talks about the period of time that these people remained here. وَلَبِثُوا فِي كَهْفِهِمْ ثَلَاثَمِائَةٍ سِنِينَ وَازْدَادُوا تِسْعًا. Now look at how beautiful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the number. He doesn't say they stayed for this amount of time. He says, and they stayed in their cave for 300 years and added 9. And added 9. So they stayed for 309 years. That's the majority opinion. They stayed for 309 years, right? But why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use this particular sequence? It is mentioned that the Jews and the Christians followed the solar calendar and the Muslims followed the lunar calendar. If you followed the solar calendar, it was a period of 300 years. But typically, for every century, the difference between the solar and the lunar calendar is approximately 3 years. And therefore, if you are following the lunar calendar, there would be an additional 9 years for the lunar calendar, which would be 309 years. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whilst we have mentioned this, قُلِ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا لَبِثُوا, say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best how long they stayed. لَهُ غَيْبُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, for Him belongs the unseen of the heavens and the earth. أَبْصِرْ بِهِ وَأَسْمِعْ, how well He sees and hears. مَا لَهُم مِّن دُونِهِ مِن وَلِيٍّ وَلَا يُشْرِكُ فِي حُكْمِهِ أَحَدًا, they have no supporter other than Him, and He lets no one share His authority. So even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is clarifying the exact number of years that these people stayed, He is saying to you that again, it doesn't really make a difference. What is important is that they were there for an extended period of time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows exactly the amount of time. Another important aspect that the Mufassirin pull out from here is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it came to the number of people in the cave, then He did not give an absolute clear clarification. He mentioned a few opinions and then kind of moved along with the story. But when it came to the period of time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was very clear, very finite, that it was 309 years. Why? Because the moral of the story was that these people stayed here for an extended period of time without any nutrition, without any exercise, and then they were brought back to life, which was the real story that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wished to share with the people of that time and with us, that resurrection is something that is possible. As for the number of people in the cave, that doesn't really have too much of a bearing, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not mention the specific number that were in the cave. So this brings us to the end of the story of the people of the cave. Of course, the surah continues with various other themes and important aspects, but the actual Ashabul Kahf, this is the end of the story of Ashabul Kahf. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with the correct understanding. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.